AI is moving really fast, and this week was no different. In this week's AI Roundup, we've got agent systems, new models, policy shifts, but there were a few special headlines that caught my attention, and I think they'll catch yours as well. AI wins a Grammy, and AI can do a statistically meaningful amount of the world's work, and it's okay for AI to make a bomb now? We'll unpack all of that and more. Let's take a look. We start the week with OpenAI, of course. They're the OG here. The big release, the big announcement, everyone's gaining access to this O3 mini model. It's a thinking model. These O models are their thinking models. Well, models that start with O. In any case, this O3 mini model is one of these things that gives extra thought and consideration to the answer that it's giving you. And the mini model itself, their mini concept is their fast model. They also have O3 Mini High. I think this is for Plus and Pro subscribers only. And O3 Mini High is essentially the same thing, but it does a little bit more thinking, gives you a little bit better answer. But these O3 models, really capable, very interesting models, can really return some meaningful information to you. Another thing that they announced, search. Now, search has been out for a while. This is just using ChatGPT to search. I would say go by chat.com and type something in that you're looking for on the internet and see how it goes. But what's interesting about this release was they're releasing search to everyone. You don't even need to be logged in to be able to use it. Okay, now we talked about these O3 models, the O3 mini model. These are thinking models. One of the things that came out recently is DeepSeek. We'll hear more about them in a second. But DeepSeek was this model from China that came out a couple weeks ago and basically caught the stock market on fire, unfortunately. It had an interesting behavior where it would show you all of the thinking that it was doing very clearly, kind of in the clear. In fact, I created a video last week that kind of shows the thinking from the model and turns that into a little story, just what it's thinking. It's kind of interesting. What OpenAI has released is a little bit better thinking representation. So they've always had a little bit of summary of what was being thought, just kind of bullet points. I'm considering this, I'm thinking about that. What they've recently released, I think, in response to everyone seeing what DeepSeek has, is a much deeper version of chain of thought, is what they call it. So what it is thinking about while it's moving through the problem. This is a summarized version, so it's not quite as raw as what you'll find with DeepSeek, so not nearly as interesting or exciting, but it's still kind of telling to see what the model is going through. It's neat to see that they're opening up a little bit more transparency around what it's thinking. All right. The next thing that OpenAI released is called Deep Research. And this is a system that you can put in a prompt or a query that kind of allows the system to explore the internet, find a whole bunch of resources, compile that information, think about it. It's using the O3 thinking models and explore more possibilities again and again, and comes back with very good research papers, kind of at the PhD level is how most people are reporting it. It's in the Pro plan, so this is only a feature that the Pro plan, the $200 a month at this point, can use. It's been announced that that will be coming down to the Plus level at a certain number of generations a month, I think is kind of the expectation. But interestingly, they released it under a name that already has the exact same product behind it. A few months ago, Google announced a release of Deep Research. This was using their 1.5 models, and they have very recently upgraded to 2.0 for many things. We'll get to that in just a second. But the 1.5 Deep Research, I've used many times, turns out very good reports. I wouldn't call it PhD level reports by any stretch, so I'm very excited to see what we can get out of this deep research from OpenAI, but it is curious that they released it under the same name. My belief on this is we will not keep these as products for very long. So I think going forward, we won't see Deep Research as a standalone product. It may be an option that you can take, but it'll be rolled into so many things. It's kind of an enabling component to a whole bunch of future products that we will be seeing coming forward. We'll be using the operator feature that they released very recently and the task system to be able to kick these things off on a regular basis. So if I need my Deep Research to go off every day at 3 o'clock, and then at 5 o'clock I need that report sent to somewhere if it says certain things in it, you can imagine those kinds of tools coming very soon. And that's just kind of the combination of these different agentic tool sets that they're starting to release. They're exciting to get. I can't wait to get my hands on this. All right, and finally, the last thing that OpenAI announced was kind of easing some EU restrictions. So basically smoothing out the landing pad for them to release in the EU more meaningfully. What they've done is they're offering what they call data residency options. And basically this is just allowing the data that originated in a specific country to stay in that country. And these are part of those EU privacy regulations that is more difficult for some of these services to comply with. It's nice to see that OpenAI is starting to comply with that, and we won't see a place where these model developers are saying, you have to follow our rules. You need to change your country's rules to use our system, because these models will be so important in the future to humanity at large that it may be able to move that needle for a country and say, you need to pass some laws so that you can use us. Otherwise, you don't get the cancer-free treatment that we've got, or whatever it might be. So it's great to see that they're starting to open up to working with the regulations of the different regions that they're working in. There will be a lot more of this coming. All right, moving on, let's get to Gemini. Gemini, Google announced quite a bit. It's actually really worth listening to this part. The 2.0 models from Gemini have released, and they've been out there for a little while that you could select, but now they're the default model. If you've ever searched with Gemini and you go search with it again, you'll probably recognize that there's a difference. The 2.0 models are a large step up from 1.5. In fact, I would say I pretty much slept on the Google Gemini models for a long time because they've always felt a step or two behind. But with the 2.0 release, Gemini now is a real competitor. Use it once and you'll see. I think 2.0 is a really big step. They released Imagen 3, their image generation model, which is a pretty good model. They've also exposed that to the API, which is great. And speaking of the API, with the 2.0 models, I think it's time to reconsider. Go take a look at the prices for Google's Gemini API costs. They are tenfold less generally than what you'll find from OpenAI. And their context windows are kind of ridiculous, a million. I think they've increased to 2 million with this release. It's a little bit insane, but that notwithstanding, just the general cost for the API access is much, much lower. Fantastic kind of costs. And with the 2.0 model, I'm telling you, these 2.0 models really do step it up quite a bit. I don't know if they're quite at 4.0. I think I've been using 2.0 exclusively for the last week, and it really has served my purposes. There have been a few times I've walked back to ChatGPT just to verify what I'm getting is the actual answer, but really 2.0 is very, very strong. I never would have done that with 1.5. Okay, so it's also worth noting that, see if I can get this right. There is a 2.0 Flash experimental with apps model. That's the name of the model. I apologize. Hard to get through. It's really specific. They're Flash models. The 2.0 Flash model is the one that's default when you use Gemini. And Flash, as far as I can tell, is kind of like their concept for Mini. It's the faster model. It's not the absolute large version. They do have a 2.0 Pro model that you can go use, which is, I think, their full featured version of the model. I would say that Flash does a perfectly good job, and I don't really ever see myself going over to the Pro model, though I should give it a shot, come to think of it. But this 2.0 thinking model, experimental thinking with tools, something like that, is a concept of a thinking model that can use YouTube, curiously, it denotes that one, and it kind of calls that one out, and the internet and other tools. And so it really is a very interesting model. I've used it a couple times. I've done some real deep research with it. In fact, I interacted with that model quite a bit to try to come up with an outline for this video on how I might tell these disparate kind of stories in a meaningful kind of narrative. You be the judge whether or not it came up with a good one. I think it did a kind of an exceptional job. I would say this model, this thinking model, to me is more meaningful than the O3 Mini High. I have been using it quite a bit, and it turns out very good reports. It takes some time to turn them out, but it turns out very, very good reports. All right, let's talk about Mistral. This model doesn't get talked about a lot. They do a lot of open source modeling. They have very, very good small models, but this release was kind of interesting. They have announced the Le Chat interface, so it's kind of their ChatGPT interface experience. And it's pretty good. I would say that you definitely need to go check it out. I think it's chat.mistral.ai. Just go check it out. You don't have to log in, don't have to anything. Type in a question, hit enter, because the next thing that they announced, or kind of is part of the Le Chat kind of announcement, is that it does 1,000 words per second. Now that's the way they describe it. I think it may be 1,000 tokens per second. It's immaterial. It's so fast that it's hard to believe that it's doing anything. And in fact, it's so hard to believe that it's doing anything that I would say there may be a too fast. I'm not really sure, but there's something psychological about seeing the streaming coming out of some of these models to make it feel like I'm in a conversation or in some kind of cooperative relationship to come up with a conclusion to something. And when it just spits out the information, especially if you type something in that's a little bit private, or not necessarily private, but something you are really intimately interested in, and it comes back immediately, you kind of wonder, did you even think about this, or are you just spitting out this stuff? So it's kind of interesting to give it a shot, but I highly advise go out to head on out to chat.mistral.ai and just type in a query and see it come back very, very quickly. It's a pretty good model. It's certainly not on the order of the 2.0 from Gemini or 4.0 even, but it is a really good model. It's very, very capable. The other thing that Mistral announced, and this is worth just making a little call out for, is they're using the Ultra Flux model for image generation. Excellent model. Really, Flux does really excellent images, and they're using the Ultra version of it. So go ask for an image and see what you can come up with. Moving along, we're finally off the models. Let's talk about coding tools. Full disclosure, I'm a very heavy Cursor user. I've been doing quite a bit of work in Cursor, but before Cursor, I was certainly a user of GitHub Copilot, and GitHub Copilot has a big announcement this week. They have released an agentic aspect to their tool. Lots of words there. GitHub Copilot was kind of a tab to complete early on. They're kind of an OG in this space. Early on, they were the one that came up with, we will write the rest of the line, hit tab to complete it. Then very quickly following that, they kind of created this hit tab to complete. We may put more than just the next line. Like if you start the beginning part of a function or something, it might write the whole function for you if it's a traditional name, or it can guess what you're trying to do. So very interesting kind of interactions for a long time. I used them for quite a while. Then ChatGPT and other systems got so strong at coding that I moved into the copy and replace scenario of using ChatGPT and other things to kind of help me out with some of the mundanity of coding. But what they've moved into is this agentic coder. And what agentic means is what Cursor, which we'll talk about in a second because they also had a little bit of an announcement. Cursor created this concept of a system that could look through your code base, make decisions on what your code base was doing, what kind of architectures you were using, what kind of patterns you had, and then it had the ability, when you prompted it, let's say you wanted a new feature. I need a new page in this system. It needs to be able to show the details of this. I want a button that can add it to a favorite. I need the title to be this big and make it resizable when I am in a browser. I need to make sure that it's responsive. You can literally say that whole thing and far more complicated prompts in one shot, and it works out a plan to work through. So it doesn't have to understand it all at once. What it does, I think, as far as I can tell, is it goes through all of that, figures out an actual action plan, and works through those actions one at a time. And this allows you to even create files, to run shell commands, to delete files, to reorganize your system, creating folders, all kinds of stuff. And it many times will come back to the human and put them in the loop, called human in the loop, and kind of ask a question and say, please press this button to say you're okay with me creating this or deleting this file, those kinds of things. So it will make sure that the user is kind of an active agent, if you will, sorry for the pun there, in the whole process of developing the code. But really, these agentic systems are getting tremendously good at medium to low sophisticated environments. Once it gets to a certain level of sophistication, these systems are still, in my experience, having a little bit of struggle to understand those complexities. We'll cover that soon. That will be closed by the end of the year. We will be beyond that concern, I think. But right now, you need to be more of an active participant in coding in that space and making sure what's going out. But GitHub Copilot has moved from just tab to complete into this agentic framework. So they now, as of last week, have some features that will actually go and create files for you and do all of that kind of work. Very interesting. Very good work by them as well. What I'm seeing is they're repeating a lot of the code and kind of experience that Cursor has laid down. And I don't mean that as a negative. I think that the Cursor team has done so much work to do something to implement some very complicated experiences into a developer's editor, which already is a very complicated experience very often. They've put in these extra complications of models communicating code and ghostwriting, and sometimes communicating that they have more potential, and then creating files for you, chat systems. There's a lot that they've put in, and Cursor has done a great job of kind of simplifying that, making it relatively elegant to work with. Now, if you're not an engineer, it probably still feels a little bit overly complex, but largely that's because you're in an editor that is built for somebody that spends a lot of time in that space. I think that what we're seeing from GitHub Copilot is repeating a lot of those patterns. We'll get to parity at some point here soon. I did use the editor last week with GitHub Copilot, and it is nowhere near as capable or as reliable as what I find from Cursor at this point, but it's really the very beginning. They will be equal in no time. This is what's going to happen across the board. A lot of these systems are going to get to a place to where they have to find differentiation beyond just the agentic systems that they've developed. But really, either way, this is really fantastic news for engineers all over the place. So this is great. All right, let's talk about Cursor. All this talk about editors, I'm sorry, kind of in my wheelhouse, kind of a thing I'm intimately interested in. Cursor just got another $100 million investment, which is great news. Brings them to, I think, $2.6 billion valuation, which is kind of incredible. This is a development environment, a very specific development environment, but it's amazing that they're worth $2.6 billion being an editor of any kind. I don't think I've ever heard of anything like that. But that's not the interesting thing. What was announced was Cursor is the fastest growing SaaS, software as a service company in history, period, full stop. That's astonishing. It took them 12 months to get to $100 million recurring annual revenue. Okay. It only took them a year to get to $100 million recurring. This essentially means the people that are subscribing. So the subscribers pay yearly, of course, and the number of subscribers and the size of those subscriptions are $100 million revenue at this point. That's crazy. That's astonishing. Congratulations to the Cursor team. What you're doing is fantastic. You're moving the ball forward. You were the first ones to really show us that this was the next frontier. And I think this year we will conquer this in a major way, largely due to teams like the Cursor team who have just been pushing away and really creating things that in a lot of ways, these models and these systems weren't really ready for. They've done a lot of the patchwork to make this stuff work. But going forward, the agentic systems that we've just talked about, the deep research systems that we've just talked about, I think that starts to really help in a lot of ways. And they'll be able to use these much more advanced systems of these model builders instead of having to build it all themselves. And that's just going to be a leapfrog event. So very exciting. Congratulations, guys. All right, let's talk about one more thing before we get to the big headlines. DeepSeek, there's more to their saga. If you remember, a couple weeks ago, DeepSeek announced that they released this R1 model, and it was very, very cheap to create, very cheap. And everybody freaked out. Apparently, the financial systems caught on fire. It was kind of a mess. It was unnecessary, but that's fine. That's what financial systems will do. They've recovered since. And the DeepSeek team, we've learned maybe they used a little bit of OpenAI technology that they shouldn't have used, and maybe they had more hardware than they were allowed to tell us. But in any case, I'll still give them props. They definitely came up with some real innovation that I think is going to push all of us forward in this space. And I think even OpenAI is still responding to them, as we've just spoken about. But their saga continues as a U.S. senator forwarded a bill that would make it illegal to use or download the DeepSeek model. In fact, the senator went far enough in his bill to say that any forwarding of Chinese AI of any kind should be punishable by fines and prison time. And this just makes me sad. I understand the nationalism that is going on in America right now and other places, and that's frustrating. But at the same time, maybe there's some rationale to preventing too much of this crossover. That's not my space. I'm not interested in it. But I do wonder about going so far as to say you can't download a model. You definitely don't understand what a model is. If you're worried about somebody downloading and using a model, that's not the place that you need to protect anything. You're not advancing Chinese AI by using their model. It's just a mess. It doesn't make any sense, illogical. So basically, it's ideological. It's nationalistic. It's ugly language. It's mean. I hope we get over this. I want us to kind of stay together on this open source path. It really will start to quarantine these models into certain rich nations. And that's really unfortunate because it is a technology that has the opportunity to really explode and bring everybody up. And I hope that we keep that in mind as we move forward. All right, on to the big headlines. So there's three things that really caught my eye when I saw them this week. The first one was Sam Altman was doing an AMA in Reddit after they announced the deep research tool that we had just talked about. And one of the things he said in this AMA was that he believes, and he did qualify this quite a bit by saying this is only his belief, but he believes that AI systems and the agentic systems that we have today, that we already have today can do a single-digit amount of the economically viable tasks in the world. It's a strange language, but essentially saying work that makes money, AI can do up to 9% of it. Let's pretend. But still, statistically meaningful. That's an actual meaningful value. We're talking hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars. I'm not really sure what this might represent, but it's kind of a fantastic number to say AI, he believes, is already in the space of being able to do that. We've only started in this agentic year. This is the year of the agent, and we've only gotten 2 agents from OpenAI, maybe 1 from Anthropic, but very little in the way of agents from other systems right now. And they are about to come raining down. This is about to be the next big thing. We're going to see a ton of these coming, but with just 2 of them from OpenAI, we're already at a single-digit amount of work. This is a crazy statement. Made my eyebrows go up, that's all. Next one, made my eyebrows go down. Maybe my face. So back in 2018, Google put some very explicit language in some of their policies saying they would not develop AI for weapon systems or other systems that were intended to do harm. It was, a lot of people celebrated this language. It was good language. I think we all felt like this is that do no harm message. That this week was released. So they removed that language from those policies. It's a big deal. It's probably just because they have some government contracts they can't sign, those kinds of things. I don't know if they ever held themselves to this language anyway, but at the same time, no other developer, no other manufacturer of these AI systems had this clause. So I think it's just them kind of catching up with everyone else and saying, look, if we have to be in this space, we have to be viable in the same way everybody else is viable. If the government is going to use our systems, as you might imagine. It does make me a little bit sad because this is the optimist in me. This is the Pollyanna in me. I apologize, but I'd really like to see our language, our first language, be something along the lines of, we want to investigate using these models to solve the discord and the difficulties between nations and between different populace. It's unfortunate that the first thing that we look at is, okay, can we make a better bomb? AI might be able to make a better weapon. I understand that we do need defense and that there's reasons for that kind of protectionism. But really, we have the best technology the world has ever known, and maybe the world will ever know. And the first thing we're thinking about is war instead of peace. Let's get on the other side of it. It's just me. Yell at me in the comments. But at the same time, gosh, I'd much rather that we kind of stay open source and together and hopeful and kind of helpful to one another. AI really has that potential, so I'd really love to see that be the main mission. Okay, and on to the last. This is it. This is the last story. It's the big one. You've already heard the headline, so I don't really need to break it to you. I'm not telling you anything new. It was new when I started this whole thing. AI won a Grammy. AI and the Beatles won a Grammy. How about that? To me, that's pretty amazing. The Beatles, I think, are 200 years old at this point or something like that. It's amazing. It really is amazing. So the big headline is, yes, a Grammy was given out to the Beatles for a track that they built using, very heavily using AI technology. Really, they used machine learning technology. Not to split hairs, machine learning absolutely a backbone of AI, so I'm not trying to differentiate between that language, but it's not as if they used what most people will hear AI is. When they hear AI won a Grammy, they're thinking somebody went to ChatGPT and said, write me a song and make the voice John Lennon. That's not what happened, right? This was machine learning. John Lennon apparently recorded a demo, and some of the Beatles recorded a demo back in the late 70s. It was a scratchy demo, but it had a good song on it called Now and Then, and they wanted to keep that and kind of release that version of John Lennon singing and some of the isolation of some of the instruments and those kinds of things. And in fact, they used instrumentation from some of the Beatles later in later years, which is fascinating. So they kind of composited together quite a bit to create this song, which is fascinating. Great use of technology. We've been using computers to aid us in making music and make Grammys for a really long time. But this one was, AI won a Grammy. So it's neat. I think it's helpful that it starts those conversations again, as tiresome as they can sometimes be or as circular as they feel. Where do we fit in the world of creativity? Can a machine do the creativity? I don't think this is actually the best vehicle for that conversation just yet, because it's not really AI created it. Next year, maybe somebody will actually create a full song that gets nominated or something like that, that would be fascinating. But I think we do need to answer these questions, or at least pose them to ourselves, to try to figure out how comfortable are we in allowing the machines to do some of this creativity with us or for us. I know where I land on this one. I'd be really happy to hear where you land on this one. I know a lot of people have mixed feelings about it. I will say an example that I use is like in a 100-yard dash. Nobody has that anymore. In the 100-meter dash, we can create systems that can go faster than humans. So we could line 10 of those up and race them, but we decide not to watch that. We could get a high jumper that was made of a robot that knew how to jump very high, and we don't watch that. So I think it's by choice in some regards. I think we have the opportunity, and we probably will choose to use the hand-built, the handmade, to feel the human behind some of this stuff. I think that that'll happen on its own, but at the same time, there will be a lot of that other content that many of us are interested in, and it does feel good, and it creates happiness. Somebody's going to be able to make songs that make me very happy, and we're completely AI generated, and in fact, we're never even prompted by a human. And I'll be okay with that in a lot of ways. We just have to figure out where it fits and where we fit together, because that is coming. It's not going away. There's no way we regulate our way out of it. That's old news. The new news is let's figure out a way that we know what we feel about our own art and our own creativity. This story kind of leans into a little bit of that story. Congratulations to the Beatles. I'm sure they're very happy that I'm congratulating them. And congratulations to the machine learning that was used. Really the editors and the engineers that worked on solving those problems. So really great stuff. In any case, this was a long one. I apologize. It ended up being a bunch of cobbled together news. Everything happens every week, it feels like recently. Hopefully it'll slow down just a bit. I will say Sam Altman has been promising the one more thing. When they released the O3 mini models, they said, we still do have one more thing. And he announced in the AMA that this deep research product that they were just releasing was not the one more thing, and that it should be coming within the next week or two. And that's kind of very soon here, this week, next week. So keep your ear to the ground, see what's out there. I'm happy that you were here. Thanks for coming along for the ride on this one, and I'll see you in the next one.